My name is Sarah Zedek, my pronouns are she, her, and this is a video about the Horizon video game series for the PlayStation video game consoles for the home. The home video game console, HVGC, I believe, is the street terminology of all the known gamers out there. Knowledgeable. That's the term I'm looking for. Knowledgeable gamers. That is not a contradiction in terms. So I just finished Horizon Forbidden West a couple of hours ago, and I have some thoughts about the video game called Horizon Forbidden West, and to an extent also Horizon Zero Dawn. I played Horizon Zero Dawn a little while ago, and I thought that it was pretty good. It had some flaws that kept it from being really good, but it was pretty good. And I feel more or less the same way about Forbidden West. And I kind of want to talk about why, because I see a lot of discussion of these games that is detailed and laudatory, but not detailed about the things that I didn't like, and not particularly laudatory towards the things that I did like. So I want to talk about some of those things. But first, let's just define what the Horizon video games are. They're open world games set in a post-apocalypse where your name is Aloy and you are the former co-star of the YouTube series Hey Ash, What You Playin'? And you've decided that as a little girl, you've fallen into a hole. You decide to fall into a hole so the plot can happen to you. And you get a thing called a focus, and it reveals to you that all these robots in this post-apocalyptic tribal zone were made by the old ones, which was us. We're the old ones. It's a whole thing. I think if you watch a trailer for the Horizon games, you'll immediately sort of get what they're going for. And I held off on Horizon Zero Dawn for a long time because I saw the trailers for it and I thought, oh my god, this is going to be so obvious. Because gameplay-wise, whatever. I don't really play games for gameplay. I play games for the story, which puts me at a bit of a disadvantage in today's gaming landscape because neither the gameplay is good nor is the story most of the time. So really nobody wins. But the gamers think they win constantly because games keep putting gameplay in their games, which is a weird choice, if you ask me. So the open world games of the open world formula of the Horizon franchise is you go around to a town. I mean, it's the same as every open world game, right? There's all these regions in this map that are clouded over. You walk through and the fog of war clears. You go to these tall necks, which are just like the towers that are in every video game, every open world video game, where you have to go to the tower and you press a button, you solve a little puzzle, and then you get all of the map data. And your map fills up with all these question marks and campfires and all this other shit. And now you know all of the things that you can do with your time here in the Forbidden West. And that's a tried and true formula that I think everybody is a little bit sick of at this point. And I would say if you played Horizon Zero Dawn, Forbidden West is basically the same thing. It's actually kind of shocking the extent to which Forbidden West is basically the same thing. It really feels like they decided very early on not to fix that which wasn't terminally broken. There's part of me that appreciates that choice because it means that they were not reinventing the whole world from the ground up, the whole engine on all of the systems. They've taken the core of the previous game and just sort of like built on top of it. And that's not something you see very often these days. I feel like most sequels, their whole thing now is like we've completely reimagined what a video game engine can do. And with this, they're like, yeah, it's the same thing. It's basically the same game. It's just in a new place, and there's some new stuff. And so if you don't really like the tedium of the open world game, which I kind of do, I have a thing for tedium in games. I'm a sucker for open world games. I think that's just something I've come to terms with. I love a world where I can just wander around and mess with stuff and just imagine the stories that happened there. I always enjoy the wandering part of open world games the most, and that's why I always wind up. I've 100%ed so many not particularly good open world games, mostly just because I find that even when narratively they're garbage, their worlds still have a lot of personality, because it's like that's the only place where people can just kind of cram stuff, and there's so much pressure to sort of cram the open world with as much garbage as you can. And just by law of large numbers, some of that garbage is guaranteed to be interesting. My feeling with the Horizon games is that they are the video game equivalent of a really solid B plus Dune ripoff novel from like the 70s. Like, imagine if you got a book that was like, this thick, and its title was something like Horizon Zero Dawn. And you're like, oh, wow, what is this? And you start flipping through the pages, and there's a lot of crap in there. I tweeted jokingly a couple of days ago that open world games are like really long fantasy novels, except that instead of having to sit through 5 pages of describing an ornate banquet with a bunch of dwarves, you have to collect 5 mud crabs. And that's sort of the mode that I started seeing these games in, because I find the gameplay good, because you're using it's fun. It's got a fun little loop, because you're fighting these robot enemies and you have these bows and arrows and you can see all their weaknesses and stuff. But the fun sort of like gameplay twist is you got to shoot off specific pieces of. You've got to shoot off specific pieces so that they don't explode when the machine dies, and then you pick up those pieces and you use them to craft upgrades to your weapons and your ammo pouches and all that. There's all this game, as Tim Rogers would say, this game has trinketitis real bad. But I would say that it's okay. I would say that if you've got a strong stomach for that kind of open world gimmick, that you'll have a decent enough time. I went into Forbidden West especially with my good time hat on. I'm getting a lot of influence from Tim Rogers here. While the combat is fun, it's not really what the game is about. The combat is sort of its own little system that exists. I mean, that's the way it is with all of these games, right? Like, all of the systems, all of the gameplay, the mini games, and the various sort of like quest structures that you have to do in different places. It's there to fill time. It's there to make the game feel bigger than it is. But the thing is, when you go through, right, you go through the game and you experience the gameplay, and it's sort of like, what if the Uncharted games and the Batman games and the new Tomb Raider games all sort of came together into this weird mishmash that was also a little bit Just Cause, and then you add robot dinosaurs and women to the mix. And I think the Horizon games, they're actually, you know what, now that I think about it, I think the Horizon games are a lot more tolerable for me, just by virtue of the fact that they are simply replete with women, and they are absolutely not shy about letting there be lesbians, which is pretty cool in my book. My experience of playing through Zero Dawn was like, all right, the gameplay is fine, and then you get into the narrative, and it's like, why are these tribes the way that they are? There's clearly some cultural appropriation going on in the design department, so you just sort of feel uncomfortable. And then you get into the stuff with the tribes themselves, and it's all weird. It's all very strange. And I'm going to get into why in a moment. So there's all this stuff, like the immediate plot doesn't really have a hook for me, because, your lands are dying and you got to go and figure out why. And eventually you figure out why. But where the game really shines, and why I decided to pick up the sequel pretty soon after it released, is in its lore. Zero Dawn pretty quickly became one of my favorite open world games, despite the fact that I was kind of lukewarm on a lot of its elements, because despite those elements not necessarily always being the most fulfilling on a moment-to-moment level, the reward of exploring and finding lore and finding places that have histories and hearing about what happened before the fall, I guess, it's all really good. This series actually has some of the best sci-fi that I've seen in any game. Certainly some of the best sci-fi concepts. And they even actually pay off some of them. They even actually take advantage of a few, which is really miraculous. So I'm going to stop screwing around talking about Zero Dawn because whatever. If you've played it, you've played it. If you haven't, you haven't. We're going to talk about Forbidden West now, and spoilers for the whole thing now. So if you haven't played it and you want to play it, play it. My suggestion to you is to play on story mode, like I did, because I don't play games for the gameplay because I'm a real gamer. Just kind of stick to the main story quests, especially in the early game, because there's a lot of traversal stuff that is locked behind main quests. So Forbidden West, you go out into the West, your lands are dying again, you gotta figure out why again, and so you go out into the Forbidden West, and this game starts on such a weird note because it assumes from the beginning that not only have you played the last game, but that you really, really, really remember the cast of the previous game, which is a problem because these games, for as good as they are at coming up with ideas, they're not very good at following through on them. And one of the chief ones I would say is the tribes. So in this game, in the Forbidden West, the reason why it's forbidden is you've got a series of tribes, and the big one is the Tanakh, who are really violent and hostile. And in order to gain passage into the Forbidden West, you have to do this whole fucking quest that involves going to a guy. There's just a whole series of fetch quests. It's like 2 hours long, and it's all just in this little sort of like locked off tutorial zone where you're literally just doing busy work for some assholes who immediately die. There's all of this buildup in the first couple of hours, the first like 5 hours of the game. There's all this buildup for this political situation in this world. And they really, 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 really want you to take these tribes seriously. They're trying to make this into like the video game version of Game of Thrones by having the Sundom be as distinct as it is from the Tanakh, and then you have the Quen, and then you have the Zeniths, and you have which aren't really whatever. But you have all these different tribes that are from all over the place, and they all have these different relationships to each other, and they all have different traditions, different clothing styles, different things that they do, and they're all really well realized in terms of like the way that the areas are designed, the way that you see their particular cultural lifestyles expressed in the environment. All of that works. The problem is you go into a town and every town functions the same, where you've got an armor guy, you've got a soup guy, you've got a potions guy, you've got a weapons guy, there's a combat guy that you can fight, there's 2 or 3 new quests that you can do. There's a crafting bench and a campfire and your stash, which your stash is a great addition from the previous game, because in the previous game you have the classic video game problem of having a limited inventory. So this is a game that functions, as I said, it's got trinketitis. You've got to get all the trinkets. You got to pick up everything because you never know what might be useful, and everything is upgrades, and you got to craft all of your own ammo. And I actually don't hate that system. I think it's done relatively elegantly. But so all the towns are like exactly the same, even though they're physically different, and the people there are different, and there are some that are sort of closed off to you, and like the whole idea with, God, I'm getting so all over the place with this. It's just hard to talk about the tribes because I don't know if I want to call Horizon Forbidden West Ludonarrative Dissonance the game, because I do think that there are a lot of really strong contenders for that title, but Ludonarrative Dissonance is very much hard to ignore with Forbidden West. And the reason for that is because it's exactly what I'm saying right now. You've got all these tribes. The game devs really want you to buy into them as distinct interesting, unique cultures that have all of these little frictive elements between each other, and they have all this history, and some of it's good. A lot of it's really well written. A lot of it is really well performed. I tend to like a lot of the characters. The problem that I think fundamentally is that they are not willing to compromise the game experience in order to solidify or to emphasize the cultural aspects of these various tribes. So once you get permission to go into a town, it operates exactly the same, and everybody has the same barks. Like, you go into a town and everybody's like, I got a rumor for you if you want, Aloy. Or, do you want to get me a bunch of mushrooms for my mushroom stew? Or, do you want to get, what's another one? Do you want to get me a new pan? You want to give me a piece of corrugated metal so I can fry up some steaks? And it leads to this feeling of like, I want to buy into these characters. I want to buy into this setting, but these cultures don't really make sense because they only really exist in cutscenes. And once you're out of cutscenes, then everything is normal. And like with Aloy, here's the real problem, and why there is like this ludonarrative dissonance with these games, is that Aloy is on a very, very, very pressing quest because she's trying to figure out why the land is dying. And that's happening presently, and it's on a timeline of like weeks, if not months. So she's gotta go, and she finds all of this political brinksmanship, that's the word I was looking for. She finds it absolutely obnoxious and has no time for it. And that makes it really tough for us as the players to care about the tribal stuff. So you've got this whole thing about we're gonna do a prisoner exchange with the Tenakth, with the Sundom, so that we can gain access to, or try to establish a peace, because there was this whole thing in the previous game about the Mad King. Of course, there's a Mad King, and he did some violence, and now the Tenakth are still mad about that, and the new Sun King that you helped to install in the previous game does some stuff. And it all involves a bunch of characters that you saw in the previous game that you knew about. And we spend a lot of time with them. And then we spend a lot of time with these new guys, and we spend a lot of time setting up this conflict with the Tenakth and setting up this this embassy where it's supposed to be this big exchange of ideas between these three tribes and the Sundom. And then everybody dies in a cutscene. Like every single person involved in this political alignment, this embassy, just fucking beefs it in one cutscene, and you're just sort of left like, oh, I thought that was going to be the whole rest of the game. I thought that this was like going to be the main political tension of the story, and it's just gone at that point. So once you gain access to the open world, like the real open world, that's the point at which all of the setup of the previous 5 hours of the game have basically concluded. Like, that's its own little thing, pretty much until you get to the end of the embassy and gain access to the rest of the full open world. Everything before that is just the epilogue to the last game, which is really bizarre. It's very strange, and it starts off on this note of really feeling like an epilogue because you're having to find all the subroutines of the super AI Gaia that is tasked with recreating all life on Earth. There's a whole fucking thing about it. It matters, but I'm not going to explain it to you here. There's 2 specific things in this game that I really, really, really want to talk about that fascinated me. Because all of this political stuff, all of the weird sort of appropriate-y costume designs, and the dissonance between the story they're trying to tell and the gameplay that accompanies it, all of that was like really, really tough for me at the start of this game. I was really worried that it was going to be bad. And you get into this town, and there's a work stoppage. You're like going down this like long trolley, and you hear about this town that where outside of where the embassy is going to be held has a work stoppage going on, and the work stoppage was called by the boss. Like he did a lockout so that he could. Let me see if I can get this right. The boss of this town that involves like a lot of mining and construction of materials that get sent out to other places, especially the Sundom. They're on land that is owned by the Sundom, and the boss of the place, what he wants is he wants to have basically the mineral rights of the land from the Sundom so that he can make more profit off of the mining that gets done in this town. And this is cited unilaterally as a bad thing. The workers aren't into it. Aloy isn't into it. It's all crap. And I find that interesting that there is this like there's an explicit labor exploitation, and the way that it's handled is the workers just want to work. And they're not into this work stoppage thing. They think it's just a naked power grab on the part of this guy. And this guy, he's an asshole, but there's a part of me that can't help but wonder, like, hold on, this is border territory that was taken by this kingdom, annexed by this kingdom, and now they own it, and they get all of like a huge chunk of the profits from everything that gets mined and sold elsewhere. And they have absolute authority over everything that gets done there ultimately. So your job as the player is to make sure that the hereditary monarchy maintains its iron grip on this annexed territory that the Mad King got by killing lots of people for no reason some years ago. And I just find that interesting. I find it interesting that this game sort of preempted the Ukraine conflict a little bit. Sort of fun there. So the game starts off on that note with a weird sort of labor dispute that is, I think it's trying to do something, but it's based in a weirdly immaterial politics. And that was an early sign that this game was going to be dancing on a weird line of we're trying to be more politically aware, and we're trying to tell stories that are speculative and relevant to the moment in which the game itself is released, which I admire and respect. There's a part of me that respects their devotion to fleshing out this world, to really making those 5 hours of the first 5 hours of the game be about all of the stuff that's ultimately irrelevant, because it I don't know, there's a level of confidence in the way this game delivers its story that I find admirable. It's just unfortunate that so much of the rest of the game isn't as confident, particularly in the case of Aloy, who just will not stop telling you what to do. She's very Navi-esque in that way. There's also the unfortunate thing where all of the story information is conveyed in these really kind of robotic reverse shot sequences where there's a character in a room that you have to go talk to, and you have a little dialogue exchange, and then you get a little wheel with all these exclamation marks and questions that you can ask, and then you can leave. And on the one hand, I think it's nice that they give you the opportunity to opt out of all of that exposition, but on the other hand, a lot of that exposition is very good and very important for understanding what's happening and what's going to happen. And for as much as I say that the stuff with the embassy is kind of irrelevant, I do feel like it adds a lot to the game, especially Fashav, I think is his name. There's a guy from the kingdom from the Sundom who years ago was captured by the Tenakth, and now he is one of them. He is naturalized with the Tenakth. And he wants to write about his experiences with them and try to get people to not see the Tenakth as bloodthirsty monsters, but as just like regular people who have their own different ways. And that's cool. until he dies. But I do like how that plays with the history of Americans doing that with indigenous cultures here, and how some of them were deeply caring and others were damn near apocalyptic. I don't know. There's some interesting interplay there with history, but it does all kind of feel messy. All of the surface stuff, all of the stuff that you interact with the most is pretty messy. And these reverse shot things, what's so frustrating about them is that you could have just done a cutscene. They have all these gorgeous environments that are so thoroughly rendered and so well thought out. You can tell they put so much effort into everything. Like I can't sing the praises of the world design enough. One of the benefits, I think, of them not really fucking with the engine between games all that much is that they were able to put so much stuff into the world. And I'm not just talking about like side quests and everything. I mean that everywhere you go really genuinely feels like a place where things happened, both in the recent past and in the distant past. And that's a great feeling. I feel like this is one of the most well thought out and artfully rendered worlds in the history of open world games, because I just I feel myself pulling together the scraps of a larger narrative and a sort of like collage of narratives, all that occurred in the tragic buildup to the end days of humanity. And it's really gorgeous. I mean, visually it's gorgeous, and it just feels good to walk around and find things. And I find that everything that you find is compelling. Every bit of lore that you scan. I'm a big fan of audio logs. I know they're obvious and overdone, but I still enjoy them. And I enjoy all that written lore, and I think it works really, really well. I think a lot of that stuff is good. Let's actually talk about that stuff, the stuff that I think is good, because I'm sort of waffling around on all of this stuff that I find weird and incoherent, and it kind of sounds like I just don't like the game at all, which is not true. So I'm going to talk about what I'm actually here to talk about now, 40 minutes in. The backstory that you need to understand here is that there was 1,000 years ago, there was this thing called the Pharaoh Plague. There was a guy named Ted Faro, Faro, who built these nanomachine, these self-reproducing nanomachine robots that could process biological matter to recreate themselves, and they used it to solve climate change. But then they went crazy and they ate everything, and the only way to stop it was to not be able to stop it, but instead create an archive of all human culture and create this complex algorithmic AI with all of these subsystems that each have their own particular functions that would spend however many years calculating to break through the encryption that the Pharaoh Plague has on their shutdown passcode or whatever, so it could then deliver that passcode and then rewild the earth and bring people back in these cradle facilities and teach them everything about humanity and teach them all these languages. But then Ted Faro, he decided to purge. He purged the Apollo database, which is the database of all of human history, because he felt that humankind was doomed to repeat all of the same mistakes that it had made. And so that's why everybody speaks English in a vague American accent, and that's why there's all these weird dinosaur robots running around, and why everybody is sort of these different completely clueless cultures that are just built in the world. Like the Tanakh, they're fun. Here's what I mean when I say that they have really good ideas for these cultures. The Tanakh they live in their base is this old museum that still has these holograms of these 10 guys who fought against a swarm of machines long before the Pharaoh Plague. This was a separate thing. And they had like wingsuits, and they were super cool badasses. And there was this museum in the desert to honor them. And one of these Tanakh guys saw a hologram there that was like, we have to work together against the forces of evil or whatever. And he decided to stop being a warlord and start trying to broker peace as a result. And I like the mythology that arises out of them being around these holograms that they view as religious symbols. And then you have this other culture from across the sea, the Quen, who they have access to a number of older models of focuses, which are the things that let you interact with and just see all of the remnants of human stuff that are still around, which it's important to say the reason why all of the human stuff is as preserved as it is because 1,000 years ago when the world ended, the Pharaoh Plague ate all biological matter on Earth, and then it was just completely like hermetically sealed until Gaia rewilded the Earth a few hundred years ago. So functionally, a lot of the stuff, like one could still make the argument that it shouldn't be as preserved as it is, but it is, and we have to roll with it. But the Quen have a bunch of old focuses, and so rather than the other places, the other cultures, which have never seen a focus and have no access to any of this information, they have a bunch of them. So they have these diviners whose job it is to wear these focuses and learn what they can, and there's forbidden knowledge and there's hidden knowledge, and it turns out that the stuff that they can't see is a result of the fact that they're an older model of focus that can't read the file type that became dominant after the new model of focus came out in 2050, which I find really fun. I think that's a fun idea, that there is this whole culture about like what is redacted and what's not redacted, and it turns out that it's just because of it's just file formats, and this is the kind of thing that I really like about how this game does world building, where they come up with an interesting idea. Like they have this world with all these objects and all this particular relationships with the past and the present and all these combinations of possibilities. And they think, what's something interesting that I could do that we haven't done before? What's a culture that would make sense that sort of built off an accident of this technology? And that's a great one. Like utilizing firmware is fantastic. So building up from that, on the mission that you have with Alva, who is the Quen character, she has a guy, the leader of her clan is a guy who is the CEO, which is CEO. And his whole thing is he believes he is a descendant of Ted Pharaoh, the guy who created the plague that ended the world, and they have this whole culture about the old ones, and Ted Pharaoh is the best of them, and they're trying to find Thebes. They're trying to find Thebes, which was Ted's retirement place. When the end of the world happened, he had this bunker built that he apparently took a bunch of weird acolytes with him to. And here's what's awesome about this bit is that you go into Thebes, right? You swim in from underground, and you swim through these like underground geothermal, there we go. These geothermal reactors, which games always use as like, oh yeah, we have these geothermal reactors that go into the earth, and there's no reason to explain why they work, but they work, and they still work even 1,000 years later. Geothermal electricity, everybody, hooray! And so they have those, but I've never actually been able to like see them in a game, and I found that kind of cool. Just like swimming through them and looking at them was neat. Coming up into this place, it is like a tomb. So on one side, you go into this living area, and you discover that so Ted Pharaoh is like an Elon Musk stand-in, and he has a Grimes stand-in who was like 16, and basically it turns out that he was running a cult, and he was being really shitty to them, and like sexually asking for favors from them. I believe that's implied. Maybe I'm filling in the blanks there. And they're also trying to experiment with immortality. And there's a lifestyle guru in there who apparently told him like, hey, Ted's been going crazier and crazier. And so this lifestyle guru is like, hey man, you ever think about like how technology is bad? And have you ever reflected on the ways that technology sort of major life force where you were trying to help people, but you kept doing things in a way that was like technologically bad. And you ever think about maybe like looking out at the universe and you realize how insignificant we are, that maybe you can grow and change after having major mistakes and sort of make amends with and come to some kind of peace. And Ted hears all of this and is immediately like, you're right. Humanity was a mistake. We really should get rid of all human culture, and that's why he purged the Apollo database. And because of the lifestyle guru, which is just one of those things another one of those things that I love. Anyway, you go into this bunker, and there's all of these obelisks, and there's all of these Egyptian themed burial things. And you look at them, and me and my girlfriend were watching this, and we both realized at the exact same moment, oh, Pharaoh! Like and I actually kind of like, it's an obvious pun, but I didn't see it coming, and I thought I got a kick out of it. And then it turns out Ted's still alive, sort of. There was a whole he had a life extension thing done to him, but it went wrong, and so he sort of turned into a sewer monster. And we get this like image of him in the blueprints, and he's just like this weird squiggly red goop. And so the CO goes in there and then comes out and is like, we must kill that thing. And it's sort of astonishing. Me and my girlfriend both were expecting there to be a boss fight with the monster version of Ted, but we don't even get to see him. We see like the weird goopy outline of him in this hologram, and it's sort of like, oh my God, what could this be? And then you get to that part, and you don't get to see it, and then you have to run out because they set the thing on fire, and now the whole place is melting down, and you have to run out and escape. It's sort of astonishing to see a game this high budget take an opportunity for a big tentacle boss monster and not take it. Like just leave it on the table. Like it's very strange and kind of admirable. And the sci-fi of it is fantastic to me. This idea of like this guy, this fucking weird libertarian guy. I will say that there's one thing that you have to sort of accept about the reality of this world, and I described it as like a materialist misstep, which is that fundamentally you have to believe that technology can save us from the climate apocalypse. So like, yes, technology is what got us into the mess in Horizon, where it caused the Pharaoh plague and it ate through everything. But the problem that they posit with this is not the technology itself. It's that this guy was bad. This guy wanted to get this stuff sorted out too fast, and he was too sloppy, and it resulted in there being this cascade. Like, the game acknowledges that capital is a problem, that capital has a corruptive influence, but they make a materialist misstep where they're trying really hard to understand this world through a historical materialist lens, I want to say, where they're trying to understand the causality of these characters made these choices. Now these characters make these choices in response to those, and on and on and on for hundreds and thousands of years. And that's great to see, and they do a lot of good stuff with that. The problem is that they don't really have a good grasp on how this stuff works in aggregate, I guess. And I think you can kind of really distill their sort of the materialist misstep of their world building from their attitude about environmental recovery through technological advancement, which is that it's still good. Like, the tools still exist, and Aloy is trying to restore it, and there's a belief that this super AI that is in charge of the system can, in fact, be good. And I just don't believe that that's true. personally. And I think that the idea that technology can save us from the climate apocalypse is a way of just wasting time and money and resources. I think the only way to actually stop the climate apocalypse is to stop doing the things that are causing the climate apocalypse, which are the things that we would have to do more of in order to invent the technology to stop the climate apocalypse. So I feel like we should just cut out the middleman there. The thing that I really liked about Pharaoh's tomb was that it was really big and really obvious in what it was criticizing. Like he's got this huge statue of himself, and then the head falls off and crushes the CEO when everything is falling apart. It's very big and very obvious and completely unsubtle, and I love it. And this is the reason why I compare it to a B-plus sci-fi novel from the 70s, because they know who their targets are. When they're doing political satire and when they're like really going after something, like they're on, like, I just haven't seen a game be this honest about, oh yeah, no, this guy's a fucking psychopath. This guy sucks. And like Elon Musk would build a statue of himself in his own tomb. Like it's just like this is how they would be. There's no attempt to apologize for the man. There's no attempt to humanize him. In fact, they go to great lengths to literally dehumanize him, which I love. So anyway, on the other side, you have the Zeniths. And this is the other thing that I find interesting. The Zeniths are people from a colony on the planet on a planet in the orbit of the star Sirius, that they faked their own deaths 1,000 years ago, and Aloy thinks that they were gone, but they actually weren't gone, and now they're back. So there's people who are 1,000 years old because their colony collapsed, and now they're the last survivors, and it's literally the same people who left 1,000 years ago. And I fucking loved that. I thought that was cool. And then they get there, and there's a lot of, they have another clone of the person that Aloy is a clone of. And so there's like this dual self thing going on, and Aloy doesn't like this version of herself after she rescues her. It's a whole back and forth, lots of very, very, very heart player kind of stuff, very Dirk. And but sort of filtered through the lens of sort of a female Dave Strider. Well, no, not Dave. Who would it be? Who is it? Who is it? Because it's sort of like if Rose was a Dirk. Yeah, that's a good way to put it that I think everybody will understand. So the Zeniths are literally the same people who left, and all the people who left were like, they were scientists and they were rich people. Mostly they were rich scientists. Like there was literally there's a character played by Carrie-Anne Moss who is literally a lesbian with the person who Aloy is a clone of, and she has a crush on Aloy that she's like trying to kidnap Aloy and take her out into space by the end. And the fact that that's just explicit is awesome. They don't even try to hide their weird lesbian tension. And Aloy as a character is notably nicer to every woman in this game than she is to every single man, which I also really appreciate. But the Zenith's plan is to get Gaia from Aloy and pals and use it to control the stuff on Earth, all of the machines and stuff on Earth, to basically wipe out all life and start fresh. Because they're a bunch of weirdo libertarian rich people. Like I said, Tilda, the one who has a crush on Aloy, she's like an ad lady who also did spy stuff with software. And there's like a military contractor guy. They're all just like the worst of the worst, and they're the exact people who would go into space and then come back 1,000 years later immortal. And their whole thing is that, yeah, they want to just they don't care about any of this. They don't care about the robots or the people or the tribes or anything. They're just going to kill everybody and start fresh and have their own awful libertarian kingdom. And they were bored being in space because they just, Tilda, Carrie-Anne Moss's character, she describes it as we were obsessed with a sort of effortless immortality. And that was a line that really stuck with me, because they talk about like, yeah, we just wanted to live forever and live forever in pleasure. So we built these VR chambers that we could. She even says virtual reality twice in the same dialogue tree. She describes like, yeah, we were just stuck in our own memories and our own simulations for 1,000 years. And that was our lives, and then we decided to come back to start everything. Of course, it turns out what they're actually fleeing from is a singularity that was the memories of all of these awful libertarian titans of industry coalesced together into an angry mass that was very mad about being stuck in a quiet place by itself for hundreds of years, which I totally get. And I think that the Zeniths are really interesting because they're like, this is how it would be. These are exactly the people who would leave and would come back, and this is exactly what they would do. They are very bored by the plot of the game. They're very bored by Aloy for the most part, and I love that. The problem is that they don't behave any differently than anybody else, really. They're sort of cold and off-putting, but so are plenty of people. They're like, they look weird, but they don't sound weird. And this gets to the problem of like, yes, everything is in English because all of the languages were purged and Gaia defaulted to English because that was her default language. But people have still been out and back for like hundreds of years, and they're very cloistered and isolated, so regional dialects would exist. And that's what's so frustrating, is that this game puts so much work into the world building and into all of these great sci-fi concepts and all this really fascinating speculative narrativization of that world in comparison with our world. And I think more than any game of this budget, certainly, Horizon Forbidden West is trying to talk about very political, pressing political issues in a way that, like, nothing else. No fucking Call of Duty, Fallout, whatever, Skyrim, what's the other one? Elden Ring. But none of it really, like, you have to say the plot out loud and then graft it onto the characters that plot requires, that are suggested by the game, in order to really understand, like, oh wow, yeah, this game is good, or at least the story is good, because all the characterization is largely the same. Everybody kind of speaks the same way. Eventually, Aloy can bully her way through any man and get whatever she wants at any point, and it like, the Zeniths don't feel particularly different. They're still human. They're still normal. They just seem to have milk for blood, and we don't even really see that. And I wanted, like Ted was such a monstrous immortal, and they're just so banal and normal, and they haven't like gone wild from 1,000 years of isolation. Like, they all look the same and dress the same, and it feels like, for as good as they are at coming up with these really interesting concepts, they're really bad at focalizing those concepts through the thing that we interact with the second most of the game, besides the gameplay itself, which has nothing to do with the narrative, which is the characters, who are the gatekeepers of the narrative, who you have to talk to in order to progress the narrative. And so they're just sort of there, and sometimes it's motivated and it works, but so often it just sort of feels mechanical. And so it's a game that pushes up against its own limitations in a lot of really profound ways, and I kind of can't help but love it for that, because my appraisement of Forbidden West is almost identical to my appraisement of Zero Dawn, which is that I found the general plot kind of boring. I found a lot of the way that the plot progressed kind of boring. A lot of the characters that I did enjoy ended up dying kind of ignominiously. A lot of the characters that stuck around, I didn't really care about. I felt bad because there's a character from the first game who plays a relatively large part in this, named Varl, who dies tragically at a certain point in the narrative. And I didn't really care all that much until there is a moment that you have to do in order to get to the end of the game where you talk to his girlfriend Zoe, and she's sitting outside by his grave. And this is the first you've seen of his grave because of plot reasons. And you two have a very honest conversation about death, which I found very moving, actually. And I found it was a good, because she's a grave singer. Zoe is a grave singer, so she's somebody who is very versed in talking about and thinking about death. She sings, and it's really moving. It's just a moving moment. And then it ends, and Zoe walks away, and now you're standing as the player. With full control, you're standing in front of Varl's grave, and there's a prompt that says, "Sit with Varl." So I figured, yeah, I'll sit and see what Aloy has to think, because it's done with a little like jagged exclamation mark bubble, which is what they do every time that somebody wants to say anything, or if there's something that Aloy is thinking about, like she has stuff in her room that you look at it, has those little exclamation marks, and you examine it, and she goes, "Oh wow, this is the thing that I had in that other time when I did a thing. Cool." Well, so you sit down at Varl's grave, and there's no dialogue. You're just looking. And so I was just sitting there sort of like examining the landscape and marveling at how beautiful it is. And this is obviously this is the same landscape that you have access to forever in the game, but they've definitely picked a time of day, and they lock the time of day because time isn't progressing in this moment. But they've picked a time of day where it just looks unbelievably gorgeous. And I just sat there sort of taking it in and thinking about how Zoe says, I buried him here where he could look out on Plainsong, which is my village, and then also look out to the plains far, far, far east where the first game started. And I just was looking out and seeing how far east you could see and thinking wow, you kind of can. I can imagine. I kind of feel it. I kind of feel what she means by that. And I'm just sort of slowly panning the camera around as the music is swelling. And I just start crying. I just started crying thinking about because this week has been shit for me. My cat died about a week ago. My granddad died a little less than a week ago. I'm going to have to go to his funeral in a couple of days. I've been thinking a lot about death recently. And this moment was just so, they make you sit with it. They give you an opportunity to sit with it. And this was the first time that I think a death in a game really, really affected me, because I was sitting there waiting for something to happen and nothing was happening. And then I realized, wait, I can be here for as long as I want. And so I just sat there and thought about what Aloy must be thinking, and thought about what everybody must be thinking, and realized just how much is actually going on in this narrative. And it made me cry. It was gorgeous. It was a beautiful moment. And it was followed very soon by you getting the best traversal option in the game, which is Loftwing. What's it called? I don't know. A Loftwing. It doesn't matter what it's called. Terror Bird, Sky Horse. And so that is this great moment of freedom on top after this sad moment of looking over Varl's grave. And I don't know. I think that sort of summarizes what's so curiously fascinating about these games, is that despite the fact that they are really limited and really busted in some, they're really well polished, there's so much work that goes into them, but a lot of times it kind of falls short for reasons where their priorities are weird. But if you stop and think about what's going on, and you think about the history of the places that they've written, it really starts to get to you. And I finished the game, and I barely explored the open world, and I haven't done a lot of the extra side quests, but I'm excited to. I'm actually excited to, because I like spending time in this world. For all its problems, I think these games are really worth playing and thinking about, because they're a type of game that we just don't get anymore, where they forego using they forego modifying the open world formula in favor of doing something with a story and a world. And it's very clear that their biggest priority was the world and how the world interacted with the history of that world and the narrative that you would have going forward. And so it's just interesting to reflect on. And it's one of those things, like, I didn't think I really wanted to play this game before it came out, until it came out, and I remembered how much I remember most of the places in Zero Dawn. I can't say the same for Arkham Knight, and I've played through that game through all the way 3 times. I can't even really say that about Breath of the Wild. There's a lot of great locations there, but a lot of it is kind of all looks the same. And I feel like it's just gorgeous, and it's got a lot of problems. But if you're willing to put on your good time hat, to continue stealing that saying from Tim Rogers, they're a good time, and they're really good sci-fi. If you're a fan of good sci-fi and you don't mind, if you're somebody who has spent any time at all writing fan fiction, I think you will get a lot out of this, because there's a lot of stuff, if you've got that muscle trained in your brain that's willing to fill in the blanks for the creators, there's a lot to get out of these games. So I guess I talked about the Horizon game series here, and I think I'm now done. Cool. Okay. End of the video here. Let's just pop those in there. Give her a little twist. Let's see here. Thank you for watching this video about some video games, I guess. If you like this video and want to support me making more videos like it, why don't you go to
camaraderie.co/Sarazetic
and give me as little as $1 a month. For $5, you get access to bonus materials like making ofs and whatever else I come up with. $10 to get your name shut out. You get your name shouted out in the credits of my videos, like these people.
Rubeline, Scott Olson, Fuefos, Skyplayer, @SheldyChandler, 12-Tone, Anarcho-Duck, Anaphylaxis, Athiet, Austin Macaulay, Bobby Jane DeForge, Cam Chacon, Cayenne Shepherd, Cleaver Bacon, Blake, Cynthia Darling, Dick Beninia, Duchess, Emma Sylvia, Evan Ritchie, Faye, Gary Marshall, Helena Brovelli, Hilda Mangold, J. MacD, J.B. Silbinary Wolf, James Bruce, Jane the Human, Jennifer Palmer, June Circuit, Catherine Jibes, L something something, Marcus Kitzinger Swoosha Cube, Morgan Hobson, Mountain Snow, Natalie Watts, Patrick Feeney, Pinball Witch, Quirk, Richard Dunbeck, Robert Cutts, Robin, Scott Olson, Susie Minike, Set, Z, Bellicose, Jay Jorts, Mad Figs, and Optimistic Duelist.
Now, it's obviously been a while since I've done a video, and I'm working on getting more done. There's a lot of stuff that's in progress that we're still kind of figuring out. Life keeps happening to me and getting in the way. You might have heard me mention that my cat died and that my grandpa died. Those are just 2 of the really just endless cavalcade of things that have been happening. I'll be talking about that in a future video, hopefully soon, but who knows? As far as videos that I have planned, there are a bunch of scripted videos that are going to be a lot more high effort than this one, and the next one I believe is going to be about the television show Lost, and that video will be titled "Everyone is Wrong About Lost." I've also got another video coming out that is much more experimental, that is going to be sort of a spiritual sequel to the transitioning video called Static Crisis. And those are just 2 of many projects that I have boiling away, that have been boiling for a year and a half, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, take your fucking pick. Assuming that God has any mercy for me in particular, those will be happening soon. If you want to make sure that those things do happen at all, make sure that the cops don't come to my house. Give me money on I'm having a problem. Grow up. Grow up. You can find me on Twitter at HMSNoFun. There is also my extremely long Homestuck fanfiction, God Feels, which recently concluded the first part of the third part of the story. It's really good. It continues to get better. We're currently on a break. I'm gonna do a video about that soon. What I learned writing 400,000 words of Homestuck fanfiction in 2 months. So actually it was 150,000 in 2 months. I shouldn't overstate it. 400,000 plus for the entire series, 150,000 in 2 months. Anyway, that's this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope that you survive the pandemic that's over. It's over, everybody. Everything's fine. Time to do a world war. I love to live in interesting times.